G'day Guardians, it's Matt here, and today I've got a Stasis Titan build that I'm so excited to share. Behemoth Titan is no longer dead, boys and girls. It is back, and it's with a vengeance. If we're going to be waiting for Bungie to buff our Behemoth Titan again, we might be waiting quite a while. So luckily, thanks to some new mods and some new perks and some guns, we can make something really cool here. Now, if you watch my Ashen Wake video, you'll know that I'm a huge fan of Elemental Wells. This is an Elemental Well build, and it's going to make sure that we always have our grenade up, we're always going to have our melee up, and we're going to have a cheeky few little weapon buffs along the way. So without further ado, let's jump in and have a look at the exotic that we need to make this build successful. We've got Heart of Inmost Light. If we're using one of our abilities, it's going to empower the other two. Empowerment means that the other abilities are going to have faster regen. That's the takeaway here. We know that our abilities are going to start regenerating faster if we start using them. It's great. But what's even better is pairing this exotic with the Stasis subclass. Stasis is full of fragments and aspects that are around regenerating abilities, meaning that if we pair it with the exotic, we are constantly going to have abilities up. Now, when working with Stasis, I sometimes get the terminology wrong regarding the Stasis crystals and the Stasis shards. I'm going to try and be as consistent as possible to what the game says, so I don't cause any confusion with the build. First up is Tectonic Harvest. When we shatter a Stasis crystal, it'll create a Stasis shard, and these shards will grant us melee energy. Cryoclasm will then allow us to slide through those Stasis crystals, grabbing that Stasis shard, essentially hidden inside of it. These two synergize perfectly because we can throw our grenade, slide through it, and grab the Stasis shards. Although in the current sandbox, the Glacier Grenade is not the only thing that can create a Stasis Crystal, I will go over some weapons that are now available to do the same thing, so we can get some shards conveniently as well. Alrighty, let's have a look at the fragments. So starting off with Whisper of Chains, this one isn't necessary for the build. It very much is just a variable and you can choose whatever fragment you like. The other two I feel like aren't really negotiable, but this one just gives you that plus 10 recovery, which is what I like the most about it, and because you also take less damage around all the crystals, and in this build we're going to be making lots of crystals. We have Whisper of Shards, where we shatter a Stasis Crystal, it'll temporarily boost our grenade energy recharge rate. Shattering additional crystals will also just increase that. We're going to be going through so many Stasis Crystals, that means our grenade is always going to be recharging that little bit faster. And lastly, we have Whisper of Fissures. When we slide through a Stasis Crystal, whether that's created through our Glacier Grenade or any weapons that are currently available, we'll be dealing more damage and a larger size of burst because of this fragment. This all might look pretty familiar because when Behemoth Titan came out, every YouTuber under the sun decided to make a build video with Heart of Inmost Light. This build has its differences, but I feel like it's enhancing on those that were previously made, especially with all the new mods and weapons that are at our disposal now. Alright, let's dive in and have a look at some of the mods that run with this build. The first one is a brand new one, Elemental Shards. Stasis shards count as Stasis Elemental Wells. We are generating Stasis shards or Stasis wells every time we throw a grenade or every time we're sliding through a Stasis crystal, thanks to those aspects that we've got going. This mod is an absolute game changer for how you can generate elemental wells, because now you don't need to muck around with anything like melee wellmaker, ordnance, just slide through those crystals and we've got ourselves an elemental well. Now, after spending a little bit of time in the lab, it's worth noting that this mod does have a lockout to it. Because we're generating 5 elemental wells, essentially, from just sliding through a glacier grenade, there is a 5-second lockout once you pick up one of those stasis crystals. You will still receive that intrinsic bonus from the stasis aspect that gives you back that melee energy. So sometimes it's worth grabbing those extra ones that you generate, and sometimes it's worth leaving them there until the 5-second lockout is over and then grabbing them again. You can also see that I'm running double grenade kickstart on my arms. This is also a new stasis mod that came out, which will refund about 25% of your grenade energy for just throwing your grenade out. On my helmet, I'm running Font of Might. This is going to give us a 25% damage buff to any of the weapons we're using that match our subclass. So any stasis weapons will automatically receive that damage buff. Lucky for me, I'm using Vulpecula and Reed's Regret, and those two pair really nicely. Because we're going to be throwing our Glacier Grenade and sliding through it, this is going to generate a Stasis Shard. And remember, that counts as an Elemental Well now. So every time we slide through our grenade, we're essentially going to give ourselves Font of Might because it's acting as an Elemental Well. This is where the string comes together with this build. We throw our grenade, we get ourselves an easy and free damage buff. I'm also running double ashes to assets on my helmet because every time we kill an enemy with the burst from our grenade when we slide through it, that actually counts as a grenade kill. So because we're going to be always throwing our grenade, it's going to give us so much super very quickly. On the legs, I'm running Elemental Charge. This is going to give us 2 stacks of Charge with Light every single time we pick up one of those stasis shards, which is acting as an elemental well. I'm also just running 1 copy of Innovation and Absolution on my legs. This is just a nice little passive for every time we pick up an Orb of Power. It's just going to reduce our cooldowns a little bit. Now the fourth mod that really strings everything together is High Energy Fire. So when we go through those stasis shards, we're going to become charged with light. Now I didn't know this until I tested it out, but high energy fire does stack with font of might. So you get 20% from high energy fire and 25% from font of might. It starts to make those stasis weapons feel really, really nice. Now my favorite part about this build is that your grenade will essentially act as a free damage boost. If you've got a good Reed's Regret with Vorpal weapon or firing line, you'll be able to get that extra damage from just chucking your grenade, sliding through it, and then there it is. You've got Font of Might and High Energy Fire to take down those bosses extra quick. Now like my Ash and Wake build, I have got two marks for this one. One of them deals with champions, the other one is more of the casual play. The first one has got charged up, which means when I'm going through my grenade and picking up those elemental wells, I'm getting an extra charge with light on top of the 2 that I'm already getting. This allows me to hold 3, which means I can proc that high energy fire on a third opponent without having to trigger my grenade or without having to use a perk like Headstone to create a stasis crystal. Now on both my marks I'm running particle deconstruction, but on the second one I am running thermoclastic strike. This allows me to deal with overload champions by myself, depending on which activity I want to run. I don't think it'd be effective in taking out the overloads in something like a Grandmaster or a Master Vogue, but for low level content it works pretty well. Now let's have a look at the weapons. The reason that this build can work so flawlessly is because Vulpecula has got Headstone on it. There is a couple weapons that do roll with Headstone, including Reed's Regret, but I don't want to be using my heavy weapon to generate extra stasis crystals. The reason that everything strings together is that Vulpecula can turn an enemy into a stasis crystal. We can slide through that and reap all the benefits as if it's our own little personal glacier grenade. You can use something like Aga's Scepter with this, but I don't recommend it. All it does is freeze the enemies, but what we need is actual stasis crystals. If we slide through a frozen enemy, nothing's going to happen besides just killing them. We want that Headstone perk on our gun so that we can turn them into an actual stasis crystal, which gives us all the perks similar to what the grenade will do for us. At the end of the day, any stasis weapon is always going to benefit from Font of Might as well as High Energy Fire, but I do recommend Vulpecula with Headstone and Reed's Regret with at least Firing Line or Vorpal Weapon. Those two are absolutely going to melt with the combination of when we slide through that grenade and we get both those damage buffs. With the changes to Trials, Reed's Regret is in a good place to being able to acquire it. Although if you haven't got yourself a good Vulpecula yet, head over to the Prismatic Recaster and have a go at the tier 3 engrams. If you're lucky, you might get the absolute gold roll, which lets you have Headstone in the last column as well as explosive payload. Now for the stats, there's nothing that you really need to spec into specifically, although I do recommend always chucking some into the discipline. With this build, your abilities are always going to be regenerating. We've got plenty of passives going on in the background, we've got plenty of things that we can do to trigger more regeneration, so nothing here is really important. So I've decided to make sure to maximize my recovery, just so I'm always healing as often as I can be, and I do like that extra grenade because the grenade is the most fundamental part of this build. Without it, we could be left in a tricky situation if we don't have a weapon with Headstone on it. And now to talk about the synergy with this build, the pros and the cons that come along with it. With all the mods, the stasis aspects and fragments, I can understand how it might seem a little bit confusing, but I'm going to break it down in a way that it does synergize very well, and a lot of it is just working in the passive. Our two stasis aspects, Tectonic Harvest and Cryoclasm, are allowing us to smash through those stasis crystals, creating shards. Now a stasis crystal can come from our Glacier Grenade, or killing an enemy with the Headstone perk. Now when we shatter a stasis crystal, it'll create a stasis shard, and this also counts as an elemental well. When we shatter that crystal as well though, it also grants us grenade energy, and it also gives us super back if we're killing an enemy with it, thanks to Ashes to Assets. Now we do have two types of stasis crystals here. We have got the one from our Glacier Grenade, and we have got the one from killing an enemy with Headstone. If we kill an enemy through Headstone, we're automatically going to get that charge with light because it's acting as an elemental well. If we are going through our Glacier Grenade, we will still get charged with light, but we will also get our melee energy back. It's around roughly 75% if we collect all of those stasis shards at the end of it. The idea here is that Heart of Inmost Light is going to try and keep our abilities up as often as possible, but we don't have to rely on our Glacier Grenade anymore to get the perks. We can start using Headstone weapons. The Headstone crystals that form on the dead enemies is going to act as a little Glacier crystal that we can slide through and still keep our buffs up, such as Charge with Light or anything else that we want to run. The pros to this build is that it's a lot of fun. I miss playing Stasis Titan, and it hasn't been in a good place for a long time. I missed being able to freeze everything and shatter everything, and now I can do that with all the additional perks that come with the mods and Headstone now. The most valuable thing here is that I can throw my grenade and get that instant damage buff for something like Reed's Regret. That absolutely melts bosses, and I can't look past that. It's definitely the best part about this build, and I think you should try it based on just that. Although the main con here is that it's not the strongest build. Yeah, it's a lot of fun, and it's great in low-level content, But anything outside of that low level casual content, it really starts to struggle. We're not going up to enemies in Master Nightfalls to try and shatter them with our grenade. We're not doing anything like that in Master Vogue, so it starts to drop off when we start getting a little bit more difficult. Not to mention that Vulpecula really starts to drop off in those high-end activities. This is purely a casual build, and if you're trying to go into anything a little bit more difficult, I probably wouldn't recommend it. But if you're looking to have a lot of fun, this is the build for you. There's been a lot of love for Stasis Hunters and Stasis Warlocks lately, and I felt like the Titans were missing out a little bit on that. But after discovering a little bit of this build and how it synergizes properly, I feel like the Headstone perk has rejuvenated our beloved Behemoth Titan. Thank you so much for tuning into this build, ladies and gentlemen, and if you stayed to the end, make sure to smack that like button, and as always, take it easy, Guardians.